Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you all so very much for joining us. Happy International Women's Day. My name is Dawn Rodolini, and I am the chair of the WFH Women and Girls with Bleeding Disorders Committee. And it is my great pleasure to be with you all today. And my heart is just full seeing all of the comments in the chats from all over the world. Thank you all for joining us. My co-chair today is Jamila Sattar. She is on the WFH von Willebrand Disease and Rare Bleeding Disorders Committee. But before I introduce her officially, let's go to the agenda. So today we're going to cover how to prepare your teenager, what is normal and abnormal bleeding. There's going to be a panel discussion on period poverty, and finally, the importance of collaboration between your gynecologist and a hematologist. Please put your questions in the Q&A box, and we will be answering that at the end of today's session. And so stay with us as we go through this. And now it is my honor and privilege to introduce my co-chair, Dr. Jamila Sattar, and she will take it on from there and introduce our panelists.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to wish all the women out there happy International Women's Day. Yep, I'm doing this again. Yep, following the dance wave. Yeah, I'm waving to all of you. Thank you all for listening in. And I would like to thank the World Federation of Hemophilia and the Women and Girls with Bleeding Disorder Committee, as well as the von Willebrand Disorder and Rare Bleeding Disorder Committee for putting this webinar together. And I'm so excited. There's so many good speakers, yeah, and three lovely ladies who will actually present to you their experience, yeah, their personal experience in period poverty. And without further ado, let me introduce you the first speaker, Dr. Hu Mei-Lin. Yeah, she is a fertility expert, a reproductive medicine expert, and a gynecologist, as well as the president of the Obstetrical and Gynecological Society of Malaysia. She will be speaking to you on how to talk to your teenagers. Yeah. So Mei-Lin, I would like to, yeah. Can you please give your presentation? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jamila. It is indeed my pleasure and my honor to be here. And I was so privileged to have been invited and be amongst this row of panelists. So I'm going to be talking to you today about how to talk and prepare your teenager for her period, or even if or even your boys for a period. Next slide, please. So I'm taking this approach as being a mom. So I have a teenager as well. And so I've used, so it's not really a very scientific talk. It's more about what we're going to do and how we're going to have this conversation. But I just thought that I'll just go through the science a little bit. So I often get asked by my friends about this as their children are going through what to expect. So I think the ballpark, I mean, of course, things don't happen in a human being the way it does, like clockwork, but rough ballpark is that the breasts will come first, and then the pubic hair, and then the period. So once your girls start to develop their breasts, then about 2 years later, probably they'll start menstruating. Next slide, please. So I thought we'll go through about what questions are frequently asked by teenagers to me. So I've done this talk across schools in Malaysia. And so it's not the same when it's on a virtual platform. It's much nicer when it's in this person. Next slide, please. So what is a period? Essentially, we introduce this to girls to say that a period is essentially a physiological shedding of the lining of the womb or the uterus. It lasts anywhere between 3 to 10 days, and it comes every 21 to 44 days. So there can be a wide variation. Some people think that they come on the same calendar day on every month, and that is a total myth. So this is very important information to get across. Next slide, please. So the biggest questions that most girls will ask me is, how do I know when I'm going to get my period? Well, there's no correct answer. Everyone is different. But if you have a mom or a sister, an aunt, or even your grandma, then you can ask them, and probably you will fall around that age. But technically it happens anywhere between the age of 9 to 16. But worldwide, we are seeing more and more girls getting their periods a little bit earlier. So now if you get your periods under 8, it is considered early. And if you haven't gotten your period by 15, then maybe it's time to go and see your gynecologist. Next slide, please. And one of the biggest worries when I talk to teens or tweens is that, you know, what do I do if I get my period in school? So obviously these are girls that you've had conversations with and now they are worried. So what I did for my little girl is that I got her a very cute little pouch and I put some sanitary, period products into her bag. And so it just looks a bit pretty. So she likes that. And the schools in Malaysia now are quite good. They often there are lots of female teachers. In fact, the female teachers outnumber the men, and often they do have products for the girls in case they start menstruating in school. Next slide, please. Of course, everyone worries about cramps and period pains and whether they're normal. Again, we have to reassure them that not everyone will have it and there are things that they can do to help. And of course, if everyone is unsure, then their family doctor or their gynecologist can help them with that. Next slide, please. In Malaysia, there is a big thing about, oh, I have my period, I can't do things. Actually, in our culture, sometimes you can't perform prayers and religious stuff when you're on your period. So there is a perception that having your period is dirty. So we're trying to get around that, but I do try to emphasize to the girls that I see that periods are a normal part of being a human or being a woman, and we should embrace it. And my motto is always that the periods that you have should never stop you from doing anything that you love. So this Chinese swimmer came out during the Olympics in 2016 in Rio, and she was applauded for talking about her period cramps, which actually prevented her from getting a gold medal. So I think she is a very, very good role model for all our girls out there, that anything is possible even when you're on your period. Next slide, please. And what products to use often comes to mind. And again, it's personal preference. So there's sanitary napkins, there's period underwear, there's the menstrual cup, which is incredibly popular these days, and of course tampons. And one of the biggest questions that we get asked in Malaysia is, can girls or women who've never had sex use tampons? And the answer is yes. And I always tell them, go as small as possible, because otherwise you're in for not a very pleasant experience. So use the products that are as small as possible. It does come in different sizes. Bigger is not always better. And so anything is possible. And if you're worried, again, go to your healthcare professional or your doctor, and we should be able to help you out. Next slide, please. And this is actually one of the things that they always ask, how to keep clean during periods. You don't need special soaps. You don't need feminine wash, which is very popular in Malaysia. And then I encourage them to use the smallest pad or the smallest tampon possible. And you just keep changing it frequently and dispose of these products thoughtfully. Of course, you just don't want to just chuck it in the bin for everyone to see. This is a little bit unsightly. Okay, next slide, please. And everyone worries about the amount of blood that actually you should lose during your period. And I always emphasize to them, actually, the total amount of blood loss is actually very, very little. It's only about 4 to 6 tablespoons of blood per month. So that's not a lot. That's like maybe 80 mils of blood. And so it's equivalent to maybe a half or 1 cup of fluid when you add in all the tissue that's coming out from your uterus. So it's actually not a lot. So if you feel that your bleeding is excessive and you need to change a pad every 1 or 2 hours and huge clots are just coming out and you're incapacitated during your periods, this is not normal and you really do need to go and see a doctor. Next slide, please. So where else can you learn more? There are lots and lots of books around. Of course, there's always the internet, but the dangers with the internet is that this information is often not verified. So go to a trustworthy adult, your school counselor, your school nurse, a trusted teacher, a trusted female adult, and even dads and uncles often are a good source of information, or they can bring you to someone who can help you. Next slide, please. So how to talk successfully to your teen? Well, I think you need to start young, and you need to make yourself available. You need to be an askable parent. Look for teachable moments. So when you're watching cartoons, or if you're watching a show with them, then perhaps an opportunity may arise where you can broach the subject, and be a safe person to talk to. So don't jump to conclusions. Keep an open mind when your teenagers are just babbling on and on about you. You tend to catch a lot if you keep your ears open. Next slide, please. So I don't think that we should actually, the topic of the talk is maybe a little bit wrong because it says talk to your teen, but I think the conversation should actually start much, much earlier. In my household, my daughter actually accidentally saw some of the period products that we use. And so she asked, who had a bloody nose, because she gets a bleeding nose sometimes, right? And then from there, we started a conversation about periods. So she called it a red booger for a long time. And she goes, "Mommy, are you having a red booger now?" I'm like, "Yeah, we are having a red booger." So that's when she was 3 or 4. She's 13 now. So we've had a conversation that is ongoing. So in the car is often, I find, a very, very good spot if you're traveling to and from, or if you have alone time with them, that's a good time to approach a topic and let it flow naturally. Next slide, please. Again, I discourage people from using pet names for genitalia. It is better to refer to things by their proper names so that you don't get embarrassed. Of course, that sometimes the fallback is that in the public toilets at inopportune moments, there'll be a very small voice going, "Mommy, what's going on with your vagina? Why is there blood coming out of it?" So that has happened to me before in a public toilet, but it demystifies genitalia. It makes it easier for future talks. And on the upside, if unfortunately abuse happens, people don't get confused, and it's easier to identify if your children are in danger if you use proper names for genitalia. Next slide, please. So this is nearly my final slide now. So when to be alarmed in terms of periods. So if your daughter has not had a period by the age of 16, if she's already started her breast development for more than 3 years and still not have a period, if she has severe cramps not relieved by basic pain medications that you can get over the counter, and if she has a very heavy bleed going through tampons faster than every 2 hours or so, that is a cause for alarm. And if she has severe mood changes in relation to her periods, all this should alarm you and send you to the nearest healthcare professional who will be able to help you. So remember, your period should not stop you from living your normal life. And if it does interfere with your normal life in any way, this is not normal, and it should maybe ring some alarm bells and prompt you to go and see your healthcare professional. So thank you, everyone, and good luck with talking to your teenager. Often it's not easy, but I hope that this presentation has made it a little bit easier for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Maylin, for such a wonderful talk. I think we will leave the questions to the end of all talks, and I would like to actually I'm Paula James. The next speaker will be Paula James, but unfortunately she sends apologies as she could not be here with you personally, but she has recorded her presentation and she'll be talking to you on heavy menstrual bleeding. Paula James is a well-known professor in medicine and hematology and a leader in the committee, in the bleeding community. And without further ado, we will hear her presentation.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much to WFH and the organizers of today's webinar for asking me to speak about a topic I'm very passionate about, which is improving our understanding of heavy menstrual bleeding so that we can improve people's quality of life. My disclosures are on this slide. So I have research funding from Takeda, CSL Behring, and Bayer. Heavy menstrual bleeding is a common problem. Between 30 and 50% of individuals who menstruate report heavy menstrual bleeding at some point during their reproductive years. And by far, this is the most common presenting symptom of an underlying bleeding disorder. And fully 15 to 30% of individuals with heavy menstrual bleeding have an underlying bleeding disorder that's contributing to that symptom. This is the official definition of heavy menstrual bleeding. So greater than 80 mils of menstrual blood loss during one cycle, during one period. This isn't the most practical definition, although with the availability of menstrual cups, some patients are able to get a better handle on the volume of blood. But for many patients, what we need to be thinking about are other things that correlate with that degree of blood loss. And so you can see those on this slide. So having to change sanitary protection frequently, such as every hour or more frequently than that, being iron deficient or iron deficiency anemia, having frequent soaking through the sheets at night, and periods that consistently last longer than 7 days. These are all signs of an abnormal period or heavy menstrual bleeding. And so in contrast on this slide, I just wanted to highlight what a normal period looks like. So changing sanitary protection a few times a day, being able to go a few hours between changing your pad or your tampon, having a normal hemoglobin, and not being iron deficient, so having a normal ferritin. It would be uncommon for someone with a normal period to flood or soak the sheets at night, and periods typically last from 2 to 7 days. As I mentioned earlier, an underlying bleeding disorder is the cause of heavy menstrual bleeding in 15 to 30% of individuals, but there are other causes that are important to be considered. Those include structural uterine abnormalities, such as fibroids or adenomyosis, hormonal imbalances, such as anovulatory cycles, which can occur following menarche or in the first few months or year after periods start, and also can occur in the perimenopausal period leading to heavy menstrual bleeding. Other hormonal problems, such as thyroid abnormalities, can lead to heavy menstrual bleeding. And then, especially in older women, we need to think about cancer. And in some patients, we need to consider whether their medications might be contributing. And here we think about things like blood thinners or anticoagulants. Heavy menstrual bleeding has a significant impact on people's lives, and historically has been the cause of 2/3 of hysterectomies in the reproductive years, many of which could be avoided. As we've discussed, it can lead to iron deficiency anemia. It's the cause of school and work absenteeism and leads to a poor quality of life. And that's really important that we address and treat this problem to improve the way people feel. And although I might have been alluding to some of these issues, I just explicitly want to call out the fact that I think problems with identifying heavy menstrual bleeding historically has been the result of sexism within our healthcare system. And if you're interested in reading more about that, there's a wonderful paper written by my colleague, Dr. Angela Wyand, who focuses on this as it relates to issues around heavy menstrual bleeding and a lack of awareness around that problem. So I want to move and talk about resources that are available and tools that have been developed to try to assist with the challenge of recognizing heavy menstrual bleeding and addressing it properly. So bleeding assessment tools are questionnaires that have been developed. These standardize a bleeding history and result in a bleeding score, which helps to quantitate or measure the severity of bleeding symptoms. These have been shown in a number of studies to be effective screening tools, especially for von Willebrand disease, which is the most common inherited bleeding disorder. and quite clearly can distinguish between bleeding that's normal and bleeding that's abnormal and that requires additional attention. The value of BATs, or bleeding assessment tools, has been recognized by a number of organizations. And in this recently published guideline on the diagnosis of von Willebrand's disease, that was a joint project between the American Society of Hematology, the International Society on Thrombosis and Hemostasis, National Hemophilia Foundation, and the World Federation of Hemophilia. In the guideline focused on the diagnosis of VWD, there are a series of recommendations addressing the value of bleeding assessment tools, especially in the primary care setting, because they can really help family docs answer that question if bleeding is normal or if it's abnormal and requires additional investigation. There are a number of other sites and conferences and resources that have been developed around this problem of heavy menstrual bleeding. One is our Let's Talk Period website. And in the red circle, you can see what's called the Self-BAT. This is a self-administered bleeding assessment tool that's freely available on our website and asks a series of questions about an individual's bleeding. And at the end, calculates your bleeding score and gives you an interpretation of whether or not that's normal for you, or is it abnormal and you should seek medical attention. And there's a PDF you can print out at the end of the Self-BAT to take with you when you're talking with your doctor. A couple of other examples of initiatives that have been undertaken to address this problem. Code Rouge is a Canadian conference focused on women and bleeding disorders. WFH has held a global summit on women and girls with inherited bleeding disorders. And this event today is a great example of initiatives in this space. The Know Your Flow website comes from Dr. Michelle Lavin and is an Irish site. Better You Know is a site from the National Hemophilia Foundation and also includes the Self-BAT. And then the Foundation for Women and Girls with Blood Disorders is a grassroots organization that started in the States and is really focused on improving care for women and girls. So I just want to mention a couple of other resources available on our Let's Talk Period website. On this part of the page, you can see that we've got resources available for nurses, for primary care providers, for teachers, and things that are all freely available if you're interested. And I did just want to focus on a recent resource that we've put up on the site for primary care physicians. And Katie Young, who is a very intelligent medical student who's been working with me, has recently had a paper accepted for publication in Canadian Family Physician that could be provided to your family doc along with this quick reference guide about how should a family doc work through a problem if somebody comes to them with an abnormal Self-BAT score or simply with a complaint of excessive bleeding. So some tips about what to think about, what diagnostic testing should be done, and then how to manage those patients. So in conclusion, what we've talked about today is that heavy menstrual bleeding is common. There are a number of resources and tools available to help people identify if they have heavy menstrual bleeding and where to go for help to try to treat that symptom. And again, I just want to emphasize that effective treatments are available, and these absolutely improve the way people feel and improve quality of life. I want to acknowledge my Let's Talk Period team and also a number of our funding organizations. Thank you so much for your attention today.
I'd like to thank Paula James for the wonderful presentation and the important tools to guide you on women with heavy menses. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Professor Kulkarni, Roshni Kulkarni. She is a professor of pediatrics and hematology at the can you, MSU, that stands for
Michigan
Dr.
State.
Kulkarni? Michigan State University, right? Yeah. And she's the lead, actually an internationally known leader in the Bleeding Disorder Society, and she's written many articles and chapters and books and has won many awards. So without further ado, Dr. Kulkarni, the floor is yours to talk on period poverty and its importance. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Jamila, and happy International Women's Day, everybody. Welcome, and thank you, Dawn. And this will be a panel discussion that I will just lead off with a little bit of an introduction. The panelists will be Lauren Phillips from New Zealand. So imagine what hour of the day it's there. And Anupama Patiria from India and Cassie Osejo from Panama. So my goodness, this is a real international panel. And I'm just going to do a brief introduction of what is period poverty, how many are impacted, and how does it affect quality of life? You heard Paula James say about quality of life. What the heck is this quality of life? And then what about the stigma? And I think the panel will talk about some solutions. Next slide. So this is the definition of period poverty. It's inadequate access to menstrual hygiene tools, just not pads and tampons, but your period panties, your education, going to school, and again, washing facilities, waste management, etc. So it's a kind of a global thing, just not the pads and tampons. I want you to understand that it's more than that. So the next slide shows the prevalence. So you can see that menstrual cycle affects all aspects of a girl's or a woman's life, like education, economics, health, dignity, participation. And period poverty, affects 500 million people who lack access to menstrual products and hygiene facilities. And, it is not a problem of just developing countries, but in developed countries, even in where I live, a lot of girls don't go to school or don't go to work because they just can't handle their periods, or they don't have access to period products because they're very poor. Some of them are very poor. Some of them live far away. So in 2014, UNESCO reported that 1 in 10 youth miss school due to lack of menstrual products. Just imagine, that is the effect. These poor girls can't have a career, can't have a life. Because of their periods, they are subjected to being poor all their lives. That is totally unfair. And to make it worse, many countries tax menstrual products. We have now advocacy groups fighting that, and I'm so delighted. I think in Scotland, they have gotten rid of it. It's very interesting. You can have a toilet paper in a toilet, but you can't have menstrual product. Women don't ask to menstruate. It's a part of their life. So we just, like when you go to the bathroom to pass urine or stools, that's a part of your natural life. You have no control over it. So same way, a girl has no control, and therefore these products should not be taxed. And what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic is that it exacerbated period poverty because there was lack of availability, plus there was isolation and quarantine. Many couldn't get to the stores or wherever they brought their product. So in short, in the next slide, this is a global thing. You can see Australia, Nigeria, India, Indiana in the United States, Sweden, London. So if you think period poverty is something only developing countries face, that is wrong. Everybody, this is a global problem. And the next slide shows just an idea of a cost. I'm not going to go over this thing, but look at the amount of money women and girls have to pay. And, for a very poor family, this is a lot of money. As you can see here, you can go over it, but the simplest product, which is probably least used and kind of difficult to use, and maybe we should make things a little better, is the menstrual cup. because each cup can last for 10 years. But then you need to know how to use it and all. And I know BBC did a program in Africa where they gave menstrual cups and these girls were able to attend school. But when you think about the cost of period, think about women and girls with bleeding disorder. Just double these costs or triple these costs, that is too much for a family who's barely living, and what about even the homeless people? What do they do? I think these are things we have to consider. And the next slide shows that there are consequences of bleeding. And I'm not going to go over this slide just to show that anemia, iron deficiency, unnecessary procedure, or all consequences of bleeding. And the next slide shows that the consequences of period poverty is tremendous because many people use rags, toilet paper, banana leaves, even cow dung, and clearly they are unable to attend school or work. And a lot of them feel stigmatized and ashamed because of their period. And it causes, mental health problems such as depression, and definitely it affects quality of life. So what are the solutions? The panel will discuss some of the solutions, but at least we should talk, we should eliminate. Think about this. I found this out. 85% of US colleges and universities provide free condoms. Oh my God. You can get free condoms, but you can't get a darn pad. That is totally ridiculous in my opinion. So we must advocate for menstrual equity and especially even target people of color, migrant people, indigenous and transgender people. And the next slide shows that this is quality of life. So your health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. Your quality of life is global. That means where you live, your social relationship and finance and everything. The health-related quality of life, which is the middle section there, is basically, effect of your illness and the impact of treatment and illness. So it has domain like pain domain, mobility domain, self-care, etc. And so if you go to some of the clinics, they have this questionnaire that not only the doctor sees you and determines your health status, your mental health, your physical health, your bone health, etc., but also how is it affecting you as a person. So my last slide, or just next slide, just shows the difference between quality of life and health-related quality of life. Quality of life is this big, issue about everything about you, including your income, housing condition, work-life balance, etc. And the health-related quality of life is a little bit more focused based on, and there are disease-specific quality of life. And the next slide is my last slide. So what do we do to improve quality of life, period poverty? We have to celebrate period power. So here's an invitation I got about celebrating puberty ceremony. What better way to talk about periods than have a puberty ceremony for our daughters and our mothers or whatever it is. And this is just to show the tremendous movement around to end period poverty or to fix period poverty and have period equity. Thank you very much. And I'll now let the panel, Lauren, Phillips, Anupama, and Cassie, talk about tackling. They're going to give you a solution.
Thank you. Good morning and a happy International Women's Day. I'm Casey Sejo and I'm 24 years old and the responsible legal affairs for the Panamanian and Hemophilia Foundation in Panama in Latin America. And menstrual poverty is a problem that is rarely talked about in Latin America. The social inequalities that exist in the countries cause many girls and teenagers don't have the necessary resource manage their menstruation with inappropriate methods, or even worse, they cannot manage it and their life are affected, for example, by not attending the school And one of the biggest problems here and everywhere is misinformation, and it plays a major role on period puberty, and that misinformation goes from the family home to the schools. And personally, I had many unpleasant experiences at school where I even stopped going to school for a while during those days because many teachers didn't consider the problems that as women we can have during our period to be of great importance, which are problems that are more serious if we are women with bleeding disorders. And it's something that didn't happen only to me. There are many girls nationwide as they grew and developed face the same problem. Then as an organization, we began to work raising awareness among educators and educational centers about what bleeding disorders were like in women and how this affected their menstrual period. And that gave a way to many schools being opening to accepting take more into account how menstruation affected the student life of their female students. So that was a small breakthrough that we made years ago in school settings. And last year in Panama, we held the first meeting of women with bleeding disorders, where we invited teachers, adults, and mothers. It was an educational day that lasted one day where the emotional state of a woman with these disorders was discussed, as well as the gynecological part. The gynecological part was the last topic that was presented because we wanted to create a space for questions and answers, but the questions were completely anonymous because we know that if we made the question open, no one will dare to ask. So we gave each participant a piece of paper where they could write their questions, and in the end they would be all answered. And we were very struck by the number of doubts that there were, from aspects that are already basic to a very complex doubt. So analyzing the situation, we realized that in order to promote a public policy to eradicate menstrual poverty in our country, we had to start working from scratch. That is educating. We can work on creating a remarkable plan, turn it into public policy, but in the end, it will not work because our young women, adult women, will not be aligned with the knowledge they should have about menstruation and their rights. So we are working on creating more workshops, more space for conversation, where they can feel safe telling us what their doubts are and what their greatest difficulties are. As an organization, perhaps these are very small steps, but they are quite significant because later on we will have prepared women who will be willing to fight for their rights, and we'll be able to dialogue with health entities to work on a plan that is functional for all. Currently in Panama, a politician proposed allow that menstrual hygiene products were free in school and hospital, but like all politics, since there is no strong interest from the public, it remains neglected. So that is the current situation in Panama. That is that as in many countries we're still beginning in the process of talking about menstrual poverty, but just is the beginning. Thank you.
Good morning and kia ora everyone. Thank you so much for that presentation, Cassie. I am calling you from New Zealand this morning at 2:40 a.m. and really excited to be talking to you about tackling period poverty. Next slide, please. So Roshni has already spoken about the challenges that those who have periods face, and I'd just like to talk a little bit about how much our own bleeding disorders community experiences period poverty and period inequity. So in 2017, HFNZ, which is the Hemophilia Foundation of New Zealand, we conducted some research in relation to our own members. And what that research found was that 80% of women self-reported heavy menstrual bleeding. This led into an excessive use of period products. So 82% of our women were using more than one period product at a time. So that may have been one tampon and 2 pads, or one tampon and 1 pad, or 2 pads. And this was because of excessive menstrual bleeding. What we also found, and I think this was what shocked me, was that 46% of our women that took this survey reported suffering financial hardship because of having to pay for period products. And I suppose for me at the time, I was attending university, and I remember my own mum having to buy me things such as tampons and toiletries every time I'd see her, because the cost of living was so high, and buying things like tampons and pads and having to use multiple things at a time really was so expensive. So in New Zealand, we are relatively lucky. Obviously, we do still experience period inequity and period poverty, but we do have a number of charities who are working specifically towards period equity. And my involvement with this movement, and I love to call it a movement because it really is this kind of uprising of women and those who bleed, and saying what's going on at the moment in terms of the cost of having a period is ridiculous. As Roshni said, there's no additional tax on toilet paper and things like that. So why, as women and people that bleed, are we having to pay so much more for a natural bodily function each month? So my involvement comes with being a trustee and a board member for one of these charities that has promoted change in our country, and we're called the Period Place. Next slide, please. Sorry, we'll go to the next slide. I've got them in the wrong order, and then we'll come back to this one. So we've talked a lot about all of the issues, but one of the things as a charity, the Period Place, what they have done is they've developed these 3 pillars in terms of addressing period inequity, and that's conversation, education, and access. So conversation is really about reducing stigma and talking about periods. We always used to talk about menstruation and menstruation products, but what we talk about now are period products, because that's what we're having. It's destigmatizing that language, engaging with government, organisation and communities to address the complexities that surround period inequity. One of the parts of the 3 pillars of the conversation as well is actually creating safe spaces for women and those that bleed to talk about these types of things. One of the things that we've found in the pandemic is obviously we're not meeting people face to face as much. So having things like this where we can actually create a safe space digitally to talk about periods and period inequity can go a huge way to reducing the stigma around conversation around periods. The second pillar that's part of this as well is education. And so it's really, really important to have events like these where we're educating not only those that have periods, but those that don't have periods about what it means to be a person that bleeds every month and what our lived experience of that is. We've also found that having education programs in schools when women and people that bleed are a little bit younger than teenagers, starting that education piece early is really important in reducing the stigma around periods and getting ahead, I suppose, of period inequity, so that we're having those conversations really early and there's less stigma, so that people are able to ask for assistance when they need. Of course, we can have conversations and we can have education, and those are really important core values as part of this movement. But if we don't have access to period products, that's kind of a fundamental issue there. So incredibly lucky in New Zealand that the government, I think in 2000, decided that period products would be available in all schools. Obviously regardless of gender, because there is the transgender community to think about, people that bleed from their periods. And so as of 2000, there was a pilot program that was advocated for by a number of charities, and the Hemophilia Foundation, of course, was on board with that. But what it means is that there's now a range of period products available to young women and those that bleed in their schools. And a great part about that is it's not just about, oh, you can come to school and here's, 4 tampons or 4 pads. Actually, those products are readily available to women and people that bleed. They're actually able to take those home. So it might be that mum's at home or they've got sisters. There's no limit on what they're able to use or take. And that's now part of our school model over here. In terms of access as well, it's not just about having, one type of product. It's about having an array of products that are available to those that bleed and reducing that stigma. What we need to think about too, though, is reusable products that, have been touted as being a really great tool in reducing period poverty, because the cost, there's an upfront cost, but the cost over a long period of time is reduced. And that is true, but we also need to think about some of our more marginalised communities. We need to think about the homeless woman or the woman that is living in a shelter. Fantastic that she has access to reusable period knickers, but it's not much use when she has no access to a washing machine, or the only way that she's able to wash her clothes is perhaps in a sink and she's in a room with 5 other family members in emergency accommodation. So these are things that we need to think about. And if we can just go back to the previous slide, there we go, the period equity ladder. So we kind of come here to talking about the products that we have as well as the education. So education and access, and those two go hand in hand. We start at the bottom rung of the ladder and kind of work our way up to the top. So the bottom is what the situation is in the absolute worst case scenario, where women have no access or no choice to period products, and they have no access or no choice in terms of period education. And I find this a really, really useful tool when we're talking about how do we overcome period inequity, how do we overcome period poverty? Well, we start right at the bottom rung of the ladder and we wipe that out. So we go to our most marginalised communities, our most marginalised women and people that bleed, and we give some type of period product and some type of education, and we work our way up until we've destroyed each rung of the ladder and we're in the absolute, best position where we've got sustained access and complete choice to period products so that people are able to use exactly the type of product that they want or need, and they're also fully informed, have the best education that's possible. One of the things that I truly believe in terms of period equity and reducing period poverty as well is really the language piece. So it is talking about periods, it's not talking about menstruation. And one of my favorite things that's happened recently, and I hope that this has been replicated overseas, is that we no longer see, advertisements for period products where for some reason they're using a strange blue liquid instead of actually showing blood. I don't know about you, I'd be pretty concerned if I had blue liquid coming from my vagina at the time of my period. And to see that we've moved away from that and that we're actually showing blood and showing women exercising and showing women, running the New York Marathon and bleeding through, I think that we're making really, really great steps in terms of reducing that stigma around periods. But for me, my passion and what we really need to address, I think, is that bottom rung of the period equity ladder and making sure that our most marginalised people and our most marginalised communities have access both to products and to education. Thank you.
Hello all, this is Anupama from India. I have a mild hemophilia, and today I'll be talking about some of the experiences that me and other fellow women bleeders of India, and also some of the solutions that our NMO as well as our chapters has done towards this period poverty. So first and foremost, what we need is to have a space to speak about periods. This is a very, very sensitive issue, a very personal issue. So people may not come out to talk about it publicly. So first, what we did is create a space We started off with our women's group. We have national level women's group, regional level women's group, and chapter women's group, where we would physically meet, have workshops also. So this included all the women of our community, including women bleeders. Recently, we started a social media group exclusively for only girls and women bleeders, and also for carriers who have bleeding tendencies, so that they could speak about their issues, because all of them have similar problems. Next slide, please. So first thing is to realize the issue. When it comes to bleeders, we have a much higher problem because we have much more heavy flow, much longer periods, and associated problems also. Like we bleed, many of us do bleed for around 1 to 1.5 months. So definitely that is going to be a higher expense. There are hidden expenses too, like we have a tendency to leak, to stain our clothes, to stain the bed linen. So every time we step out, we are also scared to, wear light outfits, light colored outfits. So we may have to have some outfits that are dark in color so that we can go out without any fear of, showing up a stain. Apart from this, due to prolonged periods, using the sanitary products for a long period, we can also come across problems with our skin, which is again an additional expenditure. So period poverty is not limited only to the cost of the menstrual hygiene products, but also all these other expenses. Next slide, please. So many times, like all of the women bleeders have come across this issue. We either leak through the dress or the bed linen, and there are lots of fingers pointed at us. So is it because we are not hygienic, we are not taking care of ourselves? Not always. Many times it could be because, there is a financial constraint. Maybe the girl was just trying to save one pad, keeping it for a bit more longer period, which led to this leakage, or maybe sudden spurge of bleeds, which happens to all of us. I know many girls who use a sanitary pad every day in fear of breakthrough bleeds. I myself have done that. And like Lauren told, we all use more than one product at a time, like maybe 2 pads, even adult diapers. So this is a big issue, and this is not just affecting our pockets, but also, our identity, our confidence. So what's the solution? So first thing what we did is a sanitary napkins project. This was by the women's group of Hemophilia Federation India. This was started in the West Zone with the help of another non-profit called RING, which is a part of the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, along with Niramai and Hemophilia Society Pune chapter. So you can see all of us with the sanitary pads. This was at our National Women's Workshop, and we couriered these products to women. This was first started in West Zone. It was successfully implemented, and it was extended to other zones. So these are some of the beneficiaries. You can see that we've given them like a bag full of sanitary napkins, each one given around 10 to 20 packets, each packet's having around 7 sanitary pads and so on. So this was the project done by the National organization and the women's group of Hemophilia Federation India, but there are also other things done by the individuals as well as chapters. Now, just giving sanitary napkins may not be enough always. How about empowering the women? So through micro enterprise grants, some women have been helped to start up a small business or some self-employment. If a woman is empowered, she would be able to take care of herself better. Then I have also listed out some other actions taken by or initiatives taken by other chapters. For example, the Karnataka Hemophilia Society have a project called Suraksha, where they have given education about menstrual hygiene and also provided sanitary napkins to 45 women. They also have a sanitary pad manufacturing unit. Mother of a teen girl with Lanzmann thrombasthenia, Lakshmi Savalkar, through Mumbai chapter supported 4 women bleeders. And Calicut chapter is planning to have education about menstrual cups and its use, also about safety in women bleeders. So this is a question that I come across many times, whether menstrual cups can be safely used by women bleeders, and for which I guess experts would be able to give us a better idea. Now, with this, I would also like to add two initiatives by the government of Kerala. I'm from Kerala, a state of India, where they have provided an option for free sanitary napkins for all girls from the classes 6 to 12. And recently, a small village in Kerala called Kumbalangi has become a sanitary free napkin village by providing, their aim is to provide 5,000 menstrual cups. So this is the symbol by UN where we women are protecting the earth, because many times the safe disposal of sanitary products is also a big issue, and women are the one who are very much affected by any climatic change. So maybe we could come forward in the recent future for something that is sustainable and at the same time eco-friendly. But just giving sanitary products is not enough, and there is much more to it. Next slide, please. So one of the very important thing is about gender equality when it comes to our diagnosis and treatment. Our problem is basically because we do have a bleeding disorder, and if we get a proper diagnosis and access to treatment, that itself is going to help us tackle this period poverty. Thank you all.
Next, we will have Joey Chow from Malaysia, and she has started this Bulan Sisters to reduce or to actually stop period poverty in Malaysia. So without further ado, Jo.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you to the World Federation of Hemophilia for inviting us. So next slide. In late December 2021, Malaysia was hit by a devastating flood, which displaced about 120,000 people. Amidst everything, there was a flurry of donations being sent in, from food to cleaning supplies to money. But there was one thing lacking: sanitary pads. Next slide. Same thing happened during the COVID-19 pandemic. As the country went into lockdown, businesses became slow and people lost their jobs. Malaysians, bless their kind hearts, rallied together to put together donations for those in need. Same thing, food and money were being sent in, but still no period products. Next slide. The common denominator of these two examples is simply that no one even realized the problem. When we think of emergency relief, food, money, clothes come to mind, but when do we ever think about period pads? This is chalked up to the fact that menstruation is rarely a common topic in Malaysia, swept to the sidelines, so when crisis hits, managing periods do not take priority. And this applies to period poverty too. Period poverty is a crisis that affects 500 million people worldwide, yet in Malaysia, there are no statistics about it. Any other crisis of this scale affecting this many people will result in celebrities singing songs to raise awareness and money to save the victims. But the difference with period poverty is that menstruation is taboo. To solve a problem, one needs to identify it. But how do you get people to identify the issue when they don't even talk about it? Next slide. Realizing this issue, I and my 3 co-founders started Bulan Sisters with the aim to demystify menstrual health among all genders and eradicate period poverty in underprivileged communities. Starting as a Zoom call between the 4 of us where we discussed our funny menstruation stories, we came to the daunting realization that Malaysia's menstrual health education is practically non-existent. One of us was literally asked, if all of the blood is already in the person, why can't they just squeeze it out in one go? Why bleed over 7 days? Wanting to do more, we took it to the US Embassy's Young Southeast Asian Leaders Initiative, where we received a grant for our pilot project, showing that really anyone can make an impact. Next slide. In particular, Bulan Sisters aims for the 3 E's: educate, establish, and empower to tackle all facets of period poverty. Under educate, we hold menstruation health workshops for underprivileged groups and update our social media concerning various topics of menstruation, from degendering menstruation to period censorship. Under Establish, we're actively building an ecosystem of Bulan sisters and cousins, so younger menstruators have a safe space to ask questions regarding their periods. Additionally, participants from our workshop can apply for our volunteering program, where we develop their advocacy skills so they may advocate for themselves. Lastly, under Empower, we aim to ensure that no menstruator is being treated unfairly because of their periods, whether it be by holding fundraisers to supply sanitary pads to underserved groups or collecting data to make sure that period poverty is indeed a visible issue. Next slide. Guided by the 3 E's, we've managed to reach about 150 people with our workshops and raise about 22,000 Canadian dollars, which allowed us to put together 2,350 menstrual hygiene boxes for our beneficiaries. Next slide. In tackling the awareness issue of period poverty, while only having 2,000 followers on social media, we've reached over 82,000 people through our infographics about the menstruation topics. We've also managed to turn 33% of our workshop participants into our volunteers. And wow, can I tell you that the future of advocacy in Malaysia really does look bright. Next slide. While these may seem like just a bunch of numbers which may not really mean anything, to us, it proves that we're on our way to eradicating period poverty in Malaysia. Recently, one of the Malaysian states have made plans to install sanitary napkin vending machines in public areas to combat period poverty, proving that period poverty is indeed becoming more visible by the day. Slowly but surely, we're committed to speaking out for those without a voice, empowering them with the knowledge so that they may advocate for themselves, and changing the general mindset of the public towards menstruation into a more positive one. Combined, we will not rest until every Malaysian menstruator is able to bleed with dignity, and hopefully one day, the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo. That was a great talk, great effort. I think you should win an award for that. All that work that you have all done. Yes, I'm sure all the women on the floor would agree with me. I think thank you so much for coming in. Yeah, and we hope to work together. So I think this will be our last talk for this evening, and I will give Maylene a break, and I will do the talking this time. And I'm going to talk to you about the importance of collaboration between hematologists and gynecologists, and I will illustrate that through a case. Next slide, please. So I would usually get referred young girls and women from a gynecologist with heavy menstrual bleeding after they have been thoroughly investigated and the hormonal and local causes have been ruled out. And they come to us, and out of up to 30% of these women have an underlying bleeding disorders. And here I will illustrate to you a case. Next slide, please. And that was the picture of the lady who had heavy menstrual bleeding. This is an 18-year-old lady who was referred to me. She had heavy menses since her very first period at the age of 13 years old. She soaked through her pads every hour, and she required monthly visits to the emergency department and practically monthly blood transfusions. Can you imagine that? And this is one of her pads soaked, and we have no problems. We should not shy away from showing soiled sanitary napkins. Next slide. Yeah. So it had a lot of psychosocial impact on her. She was unable to attend school. That also includes period poverty in there, because her periods were very prolonged, lasted for days, yeah, and she was unable to socialize. She kept to herself, and that actually had an impact on her. She had very low self-esteem, yeah, and of course period poverty. Sometimes she needed to use newspapers or sarongs because she ran out of sanitary pads, and she was even using diapers. So this is a picture here of this is actually our logo of Patient Blood Management Society of Malaysia. So this is a logo where there is a drop of blood, and there is a patient here, and this depicts a woman here in our talk today. Next slide, please. So she had also a lot of health-related issues. She was tired, she had brain fog, she couldn't concentrate in her work, she had hair loss, brittle nails, eating ice. Yeah, she goes to the refrigerator and takes out ice cubes and munch on it. Yeah, and that is called pagophagia. And of course, she did not have the feared complication of transmitted infection, but she did have alloimmunization. What that means is she had antibodies against the donor red blood cells. And that may actually cause problems later on if she becomes pregnant, and that may cause hemolytic disease of the fetus and newborn, and which may lead to hemolysis or breaking of the blood in the fetus. So that may be detrimental to her newborn. So that would be an issue later on in her life. Next slide, please. So what we did was we set up bleeding clinics once a week to receive referrals. Because of all our education workshops, we were getting a lot more referrals from gynecologists. And so we set up a BAT score, a bleeding score, whereby the ladies could score themselves. And our lab could do blood tests for von Villabrands factor and factor 8 and other factor assays. And then from that, we selected patients for our combined clinic, which we have once a month with our gynecologist. Here is a nurse, she is instituting intravenous iron to this young lady who had heavy menstrual bleeding and iron deficiency anemia. So that is not blood transfusion, that is actually iron that we are giving this young lady. Next slide, please. So we have our combined clinic once a month with the obstetrician, and we have only one adolescent gynecologist and several hematologists and our nurses. So we have a combined clinic once a month to go through the issues of women with bleeding disorder and those who have, and here is a lady, I think she is into her second month of a pregnancy with a bleeding disorder. So we manage these patients together and with very good outcomes. So we also had a lot of awareness and education programs for healthcare providers, the public, and women and girls with bleeding disorders. And this was one which we had recently 2 months ago for talking about heavy menses. Next slide, please. So my advice to all those women and girls with bleeding disorders, we need to stop the bleeding, with hormonal therapy so that we can actually stop the period pains as well as other complications such as endometriosis and endometrial cyst. We must correct iron deficiency. I know oral iron is so difficult to take, so we give a lot of intravenous iron. We need to actually stop all this unnecessary blood transfusions because, like I said, there are a lot of dangers to blood. So we need to make sure that our iron deficiency is corrected. So have a voice, talk to your healthcare providers. Don't be shy. And break that barrier. And open up. Because there are a lot of benefits of collaboration. By doing so, we can get the diagnosis promptly. And with prompt diagnosis, we have early management, which can prevent all these complications that I've mentioned. We reduce visits to hospital and hospitalizations, and that would lead to a lot of cost savings, and an improved quality of life. So, so that is the importance of collaborating with our gynecologists. Are there any things that you need to add, Maylene? Do you need to add anything to that?
Well, not very much. But I think that as we work together, the importance of the collaboration is not only that the patient gets managed in a better manner, but also that we educate each other as to what is possible for our patients. And often, I think the beauty of a multidisciplinary approach, and that's the key word here, is that we put all our things aside, and at the end of the day, the patient will benefit. So I've always benefited from the combined clinic that you started in the General Hospital in Kuala Lumpur all those years ago. And I think my practice has certainly benefited from the multidisciplinary clinics that we often ran. Yeah, not much more, but I think healthcare professionals should work together, and we should not be shy to talk to each other, because at the end of the day, that's when the patients will benefit the most. But I also think that teaching people what's normal so that they can identify what is abnormal and present, and this is the aim of what we are doing today. So know what is normal, and when it's not normal, please come forward so that you can get help. I think that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Maylin. Okay, thank you. I think we've come to the end of our speaker presentation, and that leads to question and answer. Please submit your questions in the question and answer box. I'm not sure whether the participant can actually join in the conversation and show their faces.
No. Yeah, so what I think we should do is everyone please, for all of our panelists and our speakers, let's go ahead and turn on our videos. I do have a list of questions that have been bubbling up, and I will start with the one that is in the Q&A box. Lauren, you spoke about the survey that was done in New Zealand. And I'm wondering if anyone else on the panel and our speakers, and I was thinking about Anupama, Amanda, or Cassie, has anyone else done surveys? And what is the information that you found from your communities? Jamila, Roshni, do you know of other surveys that have been done at the NMO level or even broader than the NMO level?
I have not done a survey myself on our women with bleeding disorder, but we have done a lot of workshops together. We have actually formed a group called Kawan, which actually means friends in English. So we get together and we talk a lot about our problems with menstrual bleeding and how to tackle that.
Thank you. Anu, have you been able to do that in India with your women's group? You have. I have had the privilege of going to India and working with the women's group. And I mean, they are more than 100 people strong. That is an incredible, robust group. Have you been able to do that?
Survey, no, not yet, because majority of the female bleeders are yet to come to us. So we are in the process of identifying, and maybe very soon we'll have a survey too.
Thank you so much. What is the starting point in distinguishing what is a normal period versus a not so normal period? Elvira, thank you for submitting that question. Maylin, I might ask you first from an OBGYN's perspective. If you get someone in, what triggers this idea that, oh, wait a minute, this isn't normal?
I think the questions that we most often ask is, does your bleeding stop you from doing your normal stuff? Okay, so as I said in my talk, if it is stopping you from doing what you normally do on a normal day, then it is not normal. The other thing to think about is if you're changing your products really, really often, even though if you're using, and if you need to use more than one sanitary product at the time, I think that is real alarm bells going on right there. And one of the big questions I ask my women is, do you get up at night to change your menstrual product? Or do you need to put extra stuff on your bed to protect your bedding? So all these, I think, are alarm bells. So if you're doing any of those things, you really do need to go to your healthcare professional. That's my opinion.
Oh my gosh, Maylin, that has been our lives, but we normalize it. We ourselves, we think that that is normal because, of course, this is something that is with us for our whole lives. And so I also think it's about women and girls with bleeding disorders to figure out, oh gosh, that is not normal. Getting up in the middle of the night to change your products, that's not normal. That is your way of life if you have a bleeding disorder.
Correct,
Jamila,
but that's not normal.
Right, exactly. Jamila,
I think,
yes. I think the women should actually, we need to hear your voice, you should not just keep it to yourself. Unless you talk it out, yeah, we won't know your problems. So speak
right.
out, ladies. Speak out. Yeah, break that wall, break that barrier. Speak out. That's the only way you can help you ladies. Yeah, don't be shy. Yeah, Dr. Kulkarni.
Yeah, so Dawn, in the United States and across the Hemophilia Treatment Center, we collect a lot of information, surveillance of women, men and women with bleeding disorder, and these questions on periods, everything. Our wonderful nurses are just great in doing a PVAC score and a ISTH bleeding assessment tool that Paula James alluded to. That's like a regular thing in our clinic that we collect. And clearly when we meet them, formerly I used to do that. I think I take my hats off to all the nurses across the countries. They are the ones who sometimes reach out to these patients, and patients sometimes are intimidated in talking to the physicians and feel they don't have the time and this and that. But our frontline folks, like even our social workers, I mean, everybody is now so much aware that we basically approach these women from different angles. So that's the beauty of having a multidisciplinary. And then we have the Women and Girls clinic, where we are actually, I think the OBGYN is becoming a part of our team, and we hope to include midwives, because not every place has, OBGYN, especially in the hinterlands and in communities like in Amish communities and things like that. So on our part, we have to actively reach out. But on their part, as Jamila said, they also have to have awareness that this is an issue and they can talk about it.
Yeah, thank you, Roshni. I think that was something I heard throughout Lauren's presentation, Joe's presentation, it's about normalizing the conversation around periods, because it's the regular population that's not already being seen by our hemophilia treatment centers or by bleeding clinics that are being lost, and they are being so directly impacted by not even understanding that what their experience is not normal. And so I think the more you can do, all of our NMOs, including in the United States, the more we can do to get the word out through different channels. I was really impressed with the various things, and Cassie talked about in Panama, just starting to have the conversation in a safe space by allowing anonymous questions to come in and being able to talk about this. So I'm going to get to the next question. Do you think that carriers should receive, hold on, sorry, my question just got covered up by applause, so good job. Do you think that carriers should receive clotting factor at childbirth to manage excessive bleeding in child labor? So I don't know who to go to first. I'll go to Roshni first, and then we'll go to Jamila.
Yes. So my answer is yes. We normally, I mean, it depends on the level. Some factors during pregnancy go up, others remain the same, like factor 9 doesn't change and factor 8 goes up and all. And, it's really not the factor level, but whether you're bleeding or not. If you're bleeding, you need help, whether it's with tranexamic acid or factor product or whatever it is. The other thing I want to really push for is I wish more and more companies would include women in their clinical trials, pregnant and non-pregnant. And it's only that way we will learn the effectiveness of these products, what to use and what not to use. Women have been excluded for all these years, and only recently I applaud the companies who are reaching out to women and girls to be included in clinical trials on new products.
Yeah, good points, Roshni. Thank you. Jamila?
Yeah, it will depend on the factor level. For mild hemophilia, if they can keep the factor level above 30%, then they may not need a factor concentrate, but with just tranexamic acid. But we keep an eye, even post-delivery, postpartum. That's very important. So we keep an eye, and we have them call us back, if there's any heavy bleeding. But we continue on the tranexamic acid for those who are, with factor levels, yeah, about 30% or so. We will continue for a week or so, but always educate the mothers, the carriers, to call us if there's any, more severe bleeding.
And
So,
talk to the
yeah,
OBGYN. That's a conversation.
Yeah.
I think we both
Yeah.
are taking care of the patient. So from different
connecting your OBGYN
Yes,
with your
yes.
hemophilia treatment center,
Yes.
if that's not happening, I think is a vital part. I also want to bring up a phrase that we are hearing more and more, and we use it in hemophilia. We don't often use it with women and girls, and that is shared decision making.
Correct.
We need to be part of the conversation as the patient. We should be coming up with the solution together with our physicians, whether it's our hematologist and our OBGYNs together. So I'd like to advocate for that.
And it could be a simple conversation like, I want to deliver at home.
Absolutely.
That patients sometimes decide, then I feel very nervous and I look at my OBGYN colleague and say, oh, what do you think?
And I would say, no. I would be having very large words with that patient and try to convince her that a safe birth is better than a home birth. So yes, I totally agree with Dr. Jamila and Dr. Rushni. Yes, this is a perfect example of the multidisciplinary approach. And often what we forget in our women who are bleeders is the thromboembolic risk that they also have. So and very recently I had a chat with one of my maternal fetal physicians, and what he said to me, which has always stuck in my mind now, is that we can stop a bleed, but we cannot reverse a clot. So we do have to think about thromboembolic events, even in our bleeders, and we often forget. So I think this is maybe something that is a timely reminder for all of us. But home births, for someone with a bleeding disorder, I think I'll be having nightmares tonight.
I know. Okay, let's switch gears then. Maybe we'll calm your nerves. Patricia asked, how can patient groups help with the increase of the collaboration between hematologists and OBGYNs to increase awareness about bleeding disorders in women? Who would like to start with that?
I think I will start. I think if there's a demand, there'll be a supply. So I always think that education and empowerment of our patients and their loved ones would lead the medical profession to come up to speed and come to the 21st century, because often we are lagging behind. People like Anupama and Joey, they're doing fantastic work because what they're doing is educating and empowering. And then sometimes I'm a bit ashamed to say, but doctors are a little bit set in our ways, and we don't often adopt new policies and new things that, even though it makes sense, because we're not used to it. And so if there's a demand, there will be a supply. So I think that's how patient education and patient support groups will work.
I also think something that struck me in Dr. James's presentation was about taking the self-bat, printing it out, and then taking it with you to the doctor's office. There are tools out there, and I think that we really need to communicate what those tools are. It's okay to go to the Canadian Hemophilia site to find your tool. And I think that that is what a great way to advocate for yourself, but also bring something that will open the eyes of potentially your OBGYN that may just be dismissing this as, honey, this is what's happened in your family. Your whole family deals with this. Don't worry about it. When we know, of course, it happens in our family. Bleeding disorders are hereditary, but that might not just come to the mind of an OBGYN that has not seen the light, so to speak, and worked with a hemophilia treatment center. So
Maylin has not. Yeah, so Maylin has not heard about the self-bat as well, right? Is this your first time?
Right.
Yeah.
So you see. Absolutely. Yeah. So I think it's an amazing tool that we can, as NMOs, we should be putting those things on our websites. We must be able to give access to people, but even when we put them on our own bleeding disorders websites, right? Hemophilia websites, we're still missing a giant part of the population that's bleeding and not getting treatment.
So recently,
we should also have, Dr. Kulkarni, go ahead.
Recently, our nurses trained nurses from a remote site. They're about like 900 kilometers from our site, how to do the BAT and how to do the PBAC and things like that. So I think that network should spread not only amongst the physicians, but the nurses and all the multidisciplinary team. So everybody is on the same page. So clearly the patients can do self-BAT, the family practitioner or the primary care physician or nurse practitioner can do it. The nurses can do it. And of course, the hematologist can also do it. So
Absolutely.
Clearly.
Thank you, Rashmi.
think
Guys,
Dawn-
we literally have 3 minutes left.
Okay.
I know it's gone so fast, and we have 12 questions in the chat. We have 2 more to answer, so I really want to apologize that we can't get to everyone's questions, but thank you for your active participation. It's with you that we are having this great, robust discussion. I want to finish with Lauren, and then I know there's one last slide that I'd like to share with you about our Congress sessions. But Lauren, this question is for you from Lydia. Going back to you in the survey, how did you get that developed and how did they distribute the survey? How did you bring attention to that?
Oh goodness. So the methodology that we used, I can't quite recall, but essentially it was developed as a result of one of our women's weekends, I believe. And we distributed it, brought awareness to it through our monthly Pānui, which is a newsletter. And I think that one of the driving factors for us at the time was there was a lot of awareness around it because there were a lot of people that were just over the issue. We talked about it at the Women's Weekend, we talked about our experiences, and so the survey kind of built from that, I think, and so we had that build up of emotion and really wanting to do something about it. So people were quite engaged already. And I think that was really, really useful in terms of getting actually quite a good turnout, given that we're a very small patient group. We actually got a really good turnout. So I'd say get people wound up about the cause, have conversations. If it's having a meeting, that was really key to the success of getting a good turnout. And then I think we ran it over quite a long period of time, so people had the opportunity to, if they heard about it 1 month or the next month, there was quite a period of time in which to come back.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, you really got, that I took a picture of the slide because the data was really robust. You learned a lot. And one of the things that we also know is a barrier to treatment and care. And I know this is true in the United States, is that without data, we can't get our payers, right? Whether it's healthcare ministries, governments, insurance companies in the US, we can't get them to pay for treatment for women and girls with bleeding disorders. We have to have the data. So that's my last shout out to the NMOs. That is our job, is to figure out ways to collect the data so that we can then advocate for access to treatment and care with women and girls with bleeding disorders. I want to thank all of our speakers today and our panelists. Thank you so much. And also a special shout out. For the very first time in World Federation of Hemophilia's history, we will have a women and girls with bleeding disorders track. And this goes across. Yes, huge applause. Thank you to WFH for all of your support in this effort. So in our women's track, please register. You can attend in person, which I will see you there if you're in person, or you can attend virtually. The links are everywhere through social media, but you can go to the WFH.org website. The women's track is Women and Bleeding Disorders Workshop. That's on Sunday. It's a case study discussion for women and girls with bleeding disorders. Excellent for any kind of physician who is really interested in this area. They will be discussing case studies. We have Managing Abnormal Bleeding in Women and Girls. There's a panel talking, that's part 2, about managing the abnormal bleeding in women and girls. There's laboratory testing for women and girls. We know that lab testing is really a difficult process in some cases. And then also rare bleeding disorders in women and girls, going beyond factor deficiency, going beyond the label of okay, you have VWD type 1 mild, and then you get dismissed because you have this label, versus talking about your phenotype. What is your bleeding experience like? We have a women's health focus, pain in women and girls with bleeding disorders, and transcultural issues. I heard that topic today, taboo. What is taboo? What is okay to talk about? And so this is a really important topic. Being able to speak about periods and menstruation and heavy menstrual bleeding and bleeding through. And then our von Willebrand sessions, we have a VWD session and von Willebrand factor, how that works, VWD perspectives on the impact of people with bleeding disorders, and lab diagnosis of VWD, which is also really tricky. With that, thank you, everyone. I know we're a couple of minutes over time. We needed this session. Thank you all. You are incredible. And let's close today with everyone has the right to basic health care. So you can transform the lives of women and girls living with inherited bleeding disorders by donating to WFH. Jamila, thank you so much for being my co-chair. It has been a pleasure to work with all of you. Have a great rest of your evening or day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Great speakers. Yep. Thank you. Enjoyed it very much. Thanks, Dawn. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.